on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 10, I'm Chloe Culpin. 7 people have died following overcrowding at Kabul airport as the UK offers an extension to the withdrawal. Mass COVID testing could mean a delayed start to term for England's secondary schools. And Harrison Ford surprises a firefighter on his last day at work. 7 people have died following overcrowding near Kabul airport as thousands attempt to escape Afghanistan. As harrowing scenes at the airport continue, there's mounting concerns not everyone will make it out before America's withdrawal on the 31st of August. The UK has hinted it will support an extension to that date. Meanwhile, former Prime Minister Tony Blair has accused the US of pulling out of the country with little or no consultation and branded the move imbecilic. An Afghan woman has given birth on board a US evacuation flight out of the country. The US Air Mobility Command has tweeted stills of the new mother, who was travelling to a German airbase when she went into labour. The mother and the baby have been taken to a nearby medical facility. Dominic Raab is under mounting pressure to resign after reports that the Prime Minister allowed him to stay on holiday while the Taliban advanced on Kabul. The Times says a Whitehall official advised him to return, but he nobbled Boris Johnson, who then agreed to him staying on at a 5-star resort in Greece. By the time Mr Raab returned on Monday morning, Kabul had fallen. England's secondary schools are due to open at least a week later after the holidays. The Sun is reporting the extra time would allow pupils to be tested for coronavirus before they return. Ministers are warning parents that this school year will not be business as usual. Families will be asked to test their children twice a week, while many schools say they will stagger start and end times of the day. At least 8 people have died in Mexico after Hurricane Grace tore through the country, bringing torrential rain, floods and mudslides. The storm, which is now making its way north towards the capital, has brought winds of up to 125 miles per hour, with hundreds of thousands of residents losing power. A UK-wide antibody testing programme is set to be launched for people who've tested positive for coronavirus. From Tuesday, thousands of adults with positive COVID results will also be offered a finger prick test, which will help build insight into antibody protection following infection. And a member of London's fire brigade was given a retirement present to remember last night after a surprise visit from Harrison Ford. Andrew Shaw was finishing his final shift when the Star Wars actor greeted him outside the central London station. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. Much more in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome. You are listening to Richard Tice on my new show, Tice Talk, here on Talk Radio. Yes, it's Sunday the 22nd of August, and I seem to have passed my first test because I've been allowed back for this, my second show. But looking out the window from 17 floors up here at Talk Radio Towers, it is grey, it is dark. I cannot believe such a disappointing August. And not only is the weather disappointing, but of course, none of us can probably remember such a grave and serious August with all the problems in Afghanistan that was breaking last week. We've got a full 3 hours ahead, and I need to hear your views, your thoughts on what I'm talking about, your input. So don't forget, please call 0344 499 1000 or text us talk at 87222, tweet at Talk Radio, and of course you can watch us because we're a TV radio show, so you can download the app, which is Talk Radio TV, or watch us on YouTube or Apple TV, Samsung, Roku and Rakuten. I'm not quite sure what some of these things are, but anyway, I'm sure someone will educate me. Now, amongst all the difficult news, there is some good news, and I'll be sharing that with you later on. And what I'm going to do is have a couple of particular Sunday spotlights to focus on big issues, not just the news of the day, but they're going to affect us in the coming weeks, the coming months, and the coming years. We'll be talking, of course, about Afghanistan, but I'm particularly going to spotlight on the geopolitical implications. What are China going to do? What's the implications for Taiwan? And the good news I'm going to be focusing on my second Sunday spotlight is COVID treatments. We've talked so much about the vaccines, but there is good, important news on treatments. We'll also be talking about universities that seem to not want students to go back next term. And we'll also be talking about the critical issue of whether or not we should allow overseas firms, Chinese firms, US private equity groups to buy some of the best of Britain. I believe in global Britain. I don't believe in selling Britain. And we'll be talking sport and the worrying emergence of more dementia cases amongst our footballers. All this, you're listening to Tice Talk this Sunday morning at the home of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB and on your smart speaker. This is Talk Radio.
And remember that number, 0344 499 1000. And so to my first Sunday spotlight. You know, all the thoughts on Afghanistan, which is all over the newspapers, some literally heartbreaking stories of people who, you know, we've got to get them out, and so much of that. But I'm not interested in the short-term tittle-tattle of who made what phone call or didn't made what phone call, when, and whether that would have made any difference. I'm much more interested on the big picture, because events have moved so quickly. As I said to Christo just now, literally, the world order that we've known and we've trusted and had confidence in for the last 70 to 80 years appears to have potentially shifted, changed, disappeared, literally in the last 2 weeks. Call me if you agree or disagree. But essentially, the Taliban, this group of murderous, barbaric, vile group, they're now going to be perpetuating the story that they, with their AK-47s, that they've outplayed, they've outfoxed, they've outstayed the US, they've outstayed NATO, and they've defeated the UK. And the truth is that President Biden, this is really on him. He is the man who bottled it. He ran. I mean, the US had a mere 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. We had some 700 to 800. The big question now for nations around the world is whether or not they can trust the US. Can they trust NATO? Can they trust the UK when we say we're going to stay the course? Look, I know some people say, well, we've been in Afghanistan 20 years. Look, the truth is that the US has been in South Korea for some 60 years. We, the UK, have been in Cyprus for many decades. We were in West Germany for 60 plus years. In global geopolitics, 20 years actually is not that important relative to the strategic positioning. So we need to look at what's China going to do now that the US and the NATO allies have left Afghanistan. They're clearly going to want to be getting really close to the Taliban, because Afghanistan, and this is a little known fact, there's a great piece in today's Telegraph, but Afghanistan is hugely wealthy in terms of the metals, the rare earth metals under its soil. It's been described as the Saudi Arabia of lithium, and of course lithium is really important for electric cars that we're being encouraged to buy. So, you know, that's incredibly important. And what stance is China going to have, not only with Afghanistan, but also crucially with Taiwan? Will they look to essentially unify with Taiwan, potentially invade it? And how would the US respond? Would it step in? Now, you may say, understandably, well, why do I care about Taiwan? Well, let's just look at what do we know about Taiwan. In 1979, the US passed an act called the Taiwan Relations Act, and this is really important, which stated, and I read, the United States will make available to Taiwan such defence articles and defence services as in such quantity as Taiwan shall need in order to maintain a sufficient self-defence capability. Now, it's sometimes misunderstood because that is different to what people sometimes believe, which is that the US would step in and actually fight in the event that Taiwan was invaded by China. But actually what the US have done is maintain quite a clever policy of strategic ambiguity. And this policy is designed to dissuade Taiwan from declaring unilateral independence from the People's Republic of China, but also designed to dissuade China itself from unifying with Taiwan, possibly through invasion. And it's all a bit confusing because Taiwan's official name is the Republic of China, and yet you've got China's name, which is the People's Republic of China. So, it's hard to get one's head around all of this. And okay, so, well, is this relevant to us in the UK? I hear you say, well, yes, is the simple, clear answer. We're a leading world economy, and Taiwan is about the 20th biggest economy in the world. It's a massive, massive importer and exporter. and it has the best and biggest semiconductor industry in the world. And that's important because it's a competitor to China. It's got the world's largest semiconductor company. And there'd be serious consequences if China took over Taiwan and decided to ramp up the price, for example, of semiconductor chips that we're so reliant on in our daily lives. Or imagine if China, having taken over Taiwan, halted or dramatically limited the flow of semiconductor chips to the West. Now, the golfers amongst you will be particularly concerned because Taiwan produces 80% of golf equipment. I'm concerned that Taiwan produces 75% of all the Tesla components. It's the world's fourth largest exporter of machine tools, and it has the second largest company producing co-intelligent robots, otherwise beautifully, attractively named cobots. So if Taiwan fell into the hands of the Chinese communist regime, there are serious economic strategic consequences. Call me if you agree, you want to ask more questions, or if you disagree. And we're going to be talking to Ross Feingold, a specialist at Asia Political Risks, to debate this further. And I think we've got Ross on the phone with me now. Ross, are you there? No, we haven't quite got Ross, so we're going to head straight on to the break. But for now, you're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 10:13.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Talk Radio. And we're discussing the key issue of what are the implications of Afghanistan? What are China going to do? What's their relationship going to look like with Taiwan? I'm delighted that we can talk to a specialist in this field of the political risk in Asia. Ross Feingold has lived for over 20 years in Taiwan. Ross, good morning. Thank you for joining me on this Sunday to discuss this incredibly important issue. Now, you're a specialist in US-Asia relations. What's your take on the geopolitical implications of what's happened in the last couple of weeks, and where China might take this, how they might try to turn this to their advantage?
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to be back. We see kind of two sides to this debate. So on the one hand, there's critics of the Biden administration and the way they carried out these final few weeks in Afghanistan, and certainly the last few days prior to the collapse of the government, saying that the sloppiness of how the State Department or the Defense Department or the White House approached this is really going to cause a lot of concern with leadership in Asia, whether it's Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, Philippines, maybe even India and Australia, and that the damage is really enormous, and it's going to be very difficult to repair that damage, and it's going to give an opportunity to China to continue with its messaging that we've seen in its state media in recent days, that the U.S. is not dependable. The other side of this debate is the efforts we see from the Biden administration in recent days, whether it's directly from the podiums at the White House or the State Department, or it's on social media, television interviews that the president or some of his team members have participated in, where they seem to know that this criticism is out there, which is a good thing. They're listening.
Yes.
And they're specifically referring to places like Taiwan or other places in Asia. And they're saying, no, one doesn't really have anything to do with the other. Our commitments to other countries, whether it's NATO or whether it's here in Asia, those are very strong commitments. And one situation really doesn't have much to do with the other.
And how concerned do you think people are in Taiwan about the implications of this crisis in Afghanistan, the implications for Taiwan, the extra pressure that may or may not be exerted by China? Are they fearful, or are they carrying on as normal?
It's such a great question, because a minute ago I was talking about the critics of the Biden administration, and the critics who are saying this has serious implications for whether or not U.S. commitments in Asia or other parts of the world could be relied upon. And then we see the Biden administration trying to explain it away and say, no, one has nothing to do with the other. But we often don't really talk about how the people on the ground feel, whether it's here in Taiwan or other places in Asia that I mentioned, like Korea or Japan, Philippines, Thailand. But to answer your question, here in Taiwan, people have lived under the threat of a Chinese invasion for literally decades. I don't think they really pay attention to one-off global events, even something as significant with such dire consequences in Afghanistan, because the threat is ongoing.
Yes.
And they know that the United States, and then to a lesser extent, other countries, whether it's Japan or Australia, some countries in Western Europe, they sometimes make statements about Taiwan, and you could sort of rely on that, but it's always unclear whether it's the United States or other countries, what they're willing to do for Taiwan. None of these countries have a security treaty with Taiwan, so they have some vague commitments that they might come to Taiwan's assistance. So I think people here in Taiwan, they're broadly aware of the big picture, where even the United States has never made a really firm a commitment. Again, there's no security treaty. So this is a very long way of answering your question, but I think
Ross,
the people here in Taiwan, they're not going to worry about one-off events and sort of change their views of the U.S.
And in the medium term, do you think they still trust the U.S. and indeed NATO allies to come to their aid, to come to their need, to provide them with what they need in defence equipment, in order to keep the People's Republic of China from trying to unify with Taiwan? I mean, do you think they still trust the U.S. given what we've seen?
They probably trust the U.S. to offer to sell stuff periodically, and certainly there's a history of that, fairly consistent through different U.S. presidential administrations. Certainly the Trump administration was more willing to approve weapons sales to Taiwan. Biden administration recently had approved its first sale to Taiwan, somewhat limited in its scope as well as its dollar value. So, to answer your question, I think the people here in Taiwan, they trust that the U.S. is going to offer to sell stuff periodically. They know by now that few other countries are willing to do that, so there's probably no change there. Unfortunately, the United States often sells at a high price to Taiwan as well, so there is a healthy amount of skepticism or cynicism that does come with the weapons sales as well. Whether it's just to make money or whether it's signifies that the United States would actually dispatch troops. Again, people are somewhat cynical. But when it comes to weapons sales, if Taiwan's going to be a willing buyer, then typically the U.S. is still going to be a willing seller.
And do you think what are your concerns about how China might take advantage? I mean, you've been in the region for decades, you've studied it, you really understand it, Ross. What are your concerns about how China's going to use this to its benefit, this crisis?
I think we have to watch, not just what the talking heads like someone like me says in the media or the surveys of people, because that'll capture feeling in the moment. Broad surveys of the public in different countries, including here in Taiwan. But we have to watch how leaders react, and leaders in different countries around the region. They're always in the middle between the great powers, the U.S. And China. Some of them, as we discussed earlier, they do have security treaties with the U.S. that would include Japan and Korea and the Philippines. But often, they have other issues that come into play. They want to do business with China. They want to sell to China. They want some inbound investment from China. So they're constantly struggling. So I think we should pay attention in the coming months to what actions does the leadership in Korea or Japan or other countries take vis-a-vis China? Are they still going to be talking to Xi Jinping? Are they still going to have bilateral interactions?
I mean, it just feels to me that the consequences of this, the US looks and sounds weak under a president that has lost a huge amount of his authority, and it really concerns me. I talked earlier about the grave economic consequences, the risk to the West in the event that China becomes much more dominant in its relations with Taiwan. Do you think that analysis is correct, or am I over-exaggerating?
Well, China, again, that goes to my point about how the leadership reacts, right? Because China has this enormous amount of influence. The biggest trading partner of Taiwan is China, despite the threat of invasion. And it's the same with these other countries in the region. They're worried about the United States, but on the other hand, the leaders just are not willing to completely shun their relationship with China. And it's very difficult. It was difficult before events in Afghanistan for U.S. governments to kind of get these countries to more firmly come on board with the United States. We see certainly some movement with Japan as well as Australia, but the rest of Asia, Korea, and the ASEAN countries, very, very difficult to get them to take a side on this. And you're absolutely right. I mean, these events are going to make it that much more difficult for the United States to say, take a side. So on that part, I'm not optimistic that we're going to see other leaders in Asia take the side of the U.S. against China. And these events are going to cause them maybe to continue to try to play both sides.
They certainly are, Ross, and this is going to play out over the coming months with major implications. Ross Feingold, specialist in Asia political risk and the implications. Thank you so much for joining us on this Sunday morning. Don't forget, if you've got some thoughts, give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We're talking China and Taiwan, the implications from Afghanistan. And we've got a caller, Phil in Surrey. Phil, what's your question? Good morning.
I don't know if it's really a question, Richard. It was really a bit of historical perspective on Afghanistan. I mean, if we look at our history with it, 19th and early 20th century, there were 3 Afghan wars.
Yes.
And we got defeated quite soundly. Obviously, the USSR then interceded in the later 20th century, and obviously they were defeated as well. Really, the USSR was undone by the Mujahideen.
Indeed.
I mean, the Taliban have been chosen by the Afghan people so many times. It seems we have failed to entice them if you excuse the pun,
Thank you.
with a Western democracy. And it seems that, 300 troops, Western trained and equipped, against a rabble army of shoeless Taliban.
But in reality, Phil, do you really think the Afghan people have chosen the Taliban, or actually have they been terrified into having to accept them or to go over to their side for fear of the consequences if they try and take them on or resist them? I mean, they're pretty barbaric. They've been pretty murderous in their track record.
But I think, Al Qaeda, ISIL, all those other factions have been far more murderous. I'm by no means a supporter of the Taliban, but I do find it slightly interesting that in regions they have recently conquered or retaken, they're banning the vaccine rollouts, which I found a point of interest. I mean, the other thing I would like to mention is China obviously is influential all around the world. I couldn't help noticing the other day when Dominic Raab, our Foreign Secretary, released a photograph of him on the telephone, there was an equal-size Union Jack and CCP flag behind him.
Yes,
that raises a lot more questions than whether Afghanistan is going to be influenced by China.
I saw that photo. I wasn't 100% sure whether actually that was a genuine photo or if it had been photoshopped. Who knows? But I mean, you're right. The Taliban, they have defeated. Essentially, they've defeated the US. They've outstayed us, and they've outlasted us. And it has huge implications. In particular, of course, for millions and millions of Afghans who were benefiting from the US and the NATO forces helping the Afghan army maintain a sense of stability. It wasn't perfect, but you agree with me, Phil, that actually, in terms of the benefits to the majority of the Afghan population, that was a lot better over the last 20 years than under the Taliban rule.
I think most certainly for women and for children, wholeheartedly, 100%. But I think Afghan men have a different mentality, and I think they don't want to be ruled by us. I don't want to be ruled by anybody. We've got to remember this is a tribal country of feudal warlords who nobody has ever really governed them wholeheartedly. I mean, from what I see, there is now resistance on the ground by the Afghan people to the takeover by the Taliban. So I do think there is some inherent resistance, but I think yet again we've tried to foist a Western Democrat president on a country that really very receptive.
Thank you, Phil. So often we fail to learn the lessons of previous incursions into other nations. Thank you for that, Phil from Surrey on Afghanistan. We've got the news coming up. After that, we're going to be continuing to talk about Afghanistan and the implications in terms of security, terrorism here in the UK. But give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You're listening to Tice Talk here on the home of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Chloe Culpen. 7 people have died following overcrowding at Kabul airport as the UK offers an extension to the withdrawal. Mass COVID testing could mean a delayed start to term for England's secondary schools. And Harrison Ford surprises a firefighter on his last day at work. 7 people have died following overcrowding near Kabul airport as thousands attempt to escape Afghanistan. As harrowing scenes continue, there's mounting concern not everyone will make it out before America's withdrawal on the 31st of August. The UK has hinted it will support an extension to that date. An Afghan woman has given birth on board a US evacuation flight out of the country. The US Air Mobility Command has tweeted stills of the new mother, who was travelling to a German airbase when she went into labour. The mother and baby have been taken to a nearby medical facility. England's secondary schools are due to open at least a week later after the holidays. The Sun is reporting the extra time would be to allow pupils to be tested for coronavirus before they return. Ministers are warning parents that this school year will not be business as usual. A UK-wide antibody testing programme is set to be launched for people who test positive for coronavirus. From Tuesday, thousands of adults with a positive COVID result will also be offered a finger prick test, which will help build insight into antibody protection following infection. And a member of London's fire brigade was given a retirement present to remember last night after a surprise visit from Harrison Ford. Andrew Shaw was finishing his final shift when the Star Wars actor greeted him outside the central London station. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. Much more in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back. You're listening to Richard Tice on my show Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. We've been looking at the strategic implications of what's happened in Afghanistan, on China, on Taiwan, and how concerned we should be. There's some breaking news we're hearing from another news source that the Taliban are seeking clarity on the US and UK's exit plan. They're seeking complete clarity on the foreign forces exit plan, adding managing the chaos outside Kabul airport is a complex task. Witnesses are reporting this morning that militants have helped defuse the difficult situation at the airport, where, of course, thousands have been gathering. Well, here with me to discuss this in more detail, I'm delighted we've got David Lowe, who is a senior research fellow at Leeds Beckett University, specialising in terrorism, security and policing, and a former serving police officer. David, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us at this difficult time, talking about Afghanistan. And firstly, I just wanted your thoughts on, with the latest breaking news, how long do you think that we're likely to have the US and the UK to get people out? And it really does, I mean, it feels hideously bizarre that we're having to rely on the goodwill, David, of the Taliban to get our nationals, our diplomatic staff, and the people that we have an obligation to get them out. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, good morning, Richard. It's such a mess, isn't it? Both from a political point of view, right across the board to you're looking at the chaos that there is there. Having to, and I think the issue comes down to, I mean, Joe Biden, the president of the US, has said 31st of August. Well, I think looking at the scenes we've got certainly around Kabul and the airport, and trying to get, I mean, the UK's commitment's 20,000. It's not looking likely to be by the August the 31st. So we're having to negotiate with the Taliban. Might sound a bit of irony in my voice there, but we're talking about a group that in 1 week, I think, has been playing a political game, and they've learned maybe 20 years ago to try and get political recognition, diplomatic recognition, but we're still talking about the same group that has a medieval form of Sunni Islam and is archaic in how they operate.
They seem to have learnt the clever tactic of PR and spin. They've probably learnt that from some of the people in our government. But I mean, it is a horrific thought that we have to rely on their goodwill. And in terms of with them taking over the running of the country, how concerned are you that terror groups, like Al-Qaeda or other new groups that emerge, will essentially relocate their training camps, their headquarters back into Afghanistan with essentially the support of the Taliban?
I have deep concerns about it. Al Qaeda and Taliban have similar outlook. Islamic State are there. There's a faction of Islamic State who have been fighting in Syria, and some of the foreign fighters. Now, they don't particularly like each other, so maybe there could be some conflict between them, similar to what we saw in Syria with Al-Nusra Front, who are more aligned with Al Qaeda as well as Islamic State. So, but you're quite right, Richard. The big concern is give this a couple of months when everything has died down and they've got full autonomy of that country. I think we're going to see training camps. I think we're going to see geographical locations. Afghanistan is a large country.
Yes.
You go north of it, you're looking at borders with Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and there's a small border with China. You've got Iran on one side. Now, Iran is Shia Muslim. They are predominantly Sunni Muslim, so they're not going to be getting on. But I can understand Russia's position of let's wait and see. That's one state there, because although they are independent countries, they're former Soviet states, and of course very closely tied to Russia. But my concern is what you echoed there, Richard, is training camps also having that ability. Certainly, I mean, Islamic State were one of the best for using media, multimedia. And I think that's where Taliban has also been learning this from.
And let's, of course, remember that these borders between these countries in this region, you know, it's mountainous territory. They're completely porous in many areas, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you go to its eastern border with Pakistan, it borders on the district of Waziristan, and Waziristan is a problem for the Pakistan government because you've got various Taliban factions. It's reckoned there's Al Qaeda there. It's reckoned Islamic State. Wherever there's some form of power vacuum, these groups move in. The likes of the Yemen, we're seeing it there. Libya, there's a civil war, but they managed to get rid of Islamic State from there. So wherever you've got this, and I'm not saying there'll be a power vacuum as such, but for the Taliban to try and govern the whole country, they're going to have the same problems as the Afghan government of the last 20 years. I mean, there may be other issues to go with that and how training and how democracy and so on came in, but we're already seeing within 1 week allegations of people being beaten up going to that airport.
Exactly.
And so on.
And Dave, you've studied and spoken about terrorism and security and policing at length, so you really understand what are the implications here in the UK in terms of if these training camps re-emerge as we fear in Afghanistan. How quickly are the growing concerns and implications for us here in the UK and, for example, in the US?
Well, the largest terrorist threat to us here, I mean, I always say we have it on three fronts in the UK. The Islamist cause is still the major threat. We have a threat from the extreme far right. They've grown in popularity, and perhaps the forgotten conflict, if you like, the 6 northern counties of Northern Ireland, the new IRA in particular, and continuity IRA is still active there. But it is, you look at how, certainly Islamic State in particular, they influence individuals. Look at how they attracted people to go to that area of Syria and Iraq that they held. That's not going to disappear. And it will be training individuals, maybe bring them back. They will find ways of traveling to Afghanistan. No doubt there will be in the coming months and years restrictions on trying to travel to Afghanistan and checks like we saw with Turkey, but they used their own tradecraft to disguise the true intent of their travel. So I think this can happen, but also the other thing is inspiring individuals. It will give them a little bit more heart now. That's my fear, that they will inspire individuals both here in the UK, other states like France and Germany have suffered in Europe, the US, give them that inspiration to carry out attacks in there.
Exactly. Well, look, David, thank you so much for those thoughts on the challenges that we all face, not only the geopolitical implications in Asia, but the challenges that those who defend us and keep us safe here in the UK are going to have. David Lowe from Leeds Beckett University, specialising in terrorism and security, thank you so much for those thoughts. We're going to come to your callers in just a second. The time is 10:41 and you're listening to Tice Talk at the home of common sense, Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are rattling through the first hour here on Talk Radio. We've been talking about the strategic implications of what's happened in Afghanistan. There's an interesting tweet that's come in here from Pablo, who said that Trump left open the possibility of a renewed war effort if the Taliban were to violate the terms of his agreement, promising that if the terms are broken, we'll go back with a force like no one's ever seen. I think that actually the Taliban did break that agreement signed by President Trump, and I think Trump would have acted very, very differently to Joe Biden. Keep your calls and tweets and texts coming in, 0344 499 1000. I'm delighted we've got a caller who fought in Korea, Derek in Dorset. Good morning. Welcome to Talk Radio. What would you like to say on this issue?
Good morning. A person in America has just said, if you wake up and feel useless one day, just remember it took 20 years and 4 American presidents to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. And I think that sums up the utter mistake President Biden has made. Afghan, it's heartbreaking to see what's happening there. I'm old. I'm Second World War generation. I was bombed and machine gunned, and we were a different breed. And I would like to say I'm just glad that the politicians of today in this country and in America wasn't around when we stood alone. Now, the Korean War, the forgotten war, it's given South Korea one of the biggest economies in the world. We're still there. Yes. And I would just like to remind people that 1,600 British were killed, thousands was injured, 54,000 American were killed. I was in a trench facing millions of Chinese. Fortunately, when I got there, it was a lot easier than the ones who got there first. It was terrible.
Well, Derek, you really understand the importance of staying the course. And Derek, I'd like to say, from my own personal perspective and from Talk Radio listeners and viewers, thank you for your courage, your bravery, and your service to our country and so many other veterans who fought alongside you and who fought, of course, in Afghanistan. And so you clearly feel, Derek, that that the Americans and NATO and ourselves, we should have stayed the course. As I said earlier, essentially we've been in South Korea for over 60 years, 20 years. In a sense, it goes in a flash compared to the longer term requirements.
Yes, I totally agree with you. We've given the Afghans a taste of democracy, and we've let them down. Yeah. But not only have we let them down, we've let the Western world down, and we've let democracy down. And China and Russia must be looking and saying to themselves, what a big mistake. We wouldn't have made that. And I'm just horrified. History has told us that weakness doesn't pay. You've got to be strong. You've got to show the world that you're strong. And basically, I voted for Brexit. I made a mistake. We should have a European army because America has proved we have to be strong ourselves. And we should have a big European army to protect the Western world and its democracies.
Yeah, well, obviously, Derek, I'm delighted you voted Brexit. I would differ on the European army point because that was one of the ambitions of the European Union. But trying to agree amongst different European nations, I think that we need a strong UK defence capability. I think one of the lessons that we're going to have to learn from this saga is that we need to be much more capable in building a coalition of NATO allies apart from the US, because I think what we've seen here, Derek, is that the US are they are giving up potentially the role of being the global policeman. And where there are real strategic interests, we need to be able to find ways to work with other partners, to protect our interests and to protect the sort of disaster we've had. But look, Derek, thank you very much for your call, which has been really illuminating, and thank you again for your service. And we're going to go now to Newbury from Dorset, where we've got Jocelyn, who's got some thoughts, I think, on Pakistan. Jocelyn, good morning to you.
Good morning, Mr. Tice. I'm not from Dorset, but from Berkshire, actually. But my point I was making, or I tried to make, is the problem is not the withdrawal as such, but it's timing and strategy, or more likely the lack of it. Because basically, I don't think there were no reason to stay in Afghanistan for 2 decades when the source of the problem, the state of Pakistan, was ignored. The Taliban born in Pakistan was and is still found, supported and armed by it. It was a deliberate choice by the US and its NATO ally not to act against the puppet master. And we still, the politicians are not talking about Pakistan.
Well, I mean, Pakistan, it's a nuclear power. It's absolutely
that's what it is.
Exactly, and so it's
very hypocritical.
Yes, but it's so influential in all of this, and of course, as we were talking about earlier, the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan is completely porous. It's tribal in a sense. The culture and the tribes there are actually more important than the borders. And there's no question that that region of Pakistan has been hosting Al Qaeda and the Taliban, waiting for their moments to re-emerge. So you've clearly got concerns about Pakistan. What about your concerns about China? Whilst we've got you, Jocelyn.
Well, China is obviously is a power. Starting to be on the lead of the world, unfortunately, but here we are. But China is a danger, that's for sure. But to me, it's two different problems. China is going probably to replace the US.
That's my concern.
Economy in the world. We like it or we don't like it, unfortunately, is what's happening.
Well, that's right, Jocelyn. There's no question that China is emerging as a global superpower, not only economically, but also militarily. Thank you, Jocelyn, for that. We've got another caller who fought in Afghanistan, John from Essex. Very good morning to you. And John, thank you for what you've done for our country. What are your thoughts? What are your experiences that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Well, yeah, okay. Hi, thank you for having me on your show. I listened with fascination about the Korean War and the veteran there, and I got his point on being strong. We have to remain strong, and our governments successively are showing that they're not strong, and it doesn't matter whether Conservative or Labour, they're diminishing our ability. But there's one point the Korean vet made about a European army. I can tell you firsthand from being in Afghanistan, mind you, my role wasn't so much fighting. I was a bit older by the time I got there, but I did serve and I did get shot at. But just the point on the Europeans, our NATO allies, there were very few of our European NATO allies in the firing line on the ground. They were very willing to supply logistic troops, very willing to supply aviation, some reluctantly. But when it came to out on the ground, one of the few European NATO countries actually with boots on the ground taking incoming fire was Denmark.
Right.
The East European countries put their guys in the line of fire. But when it came to our original members of the European community and where they put their troops, these are not the countries that we should be joining up into a European army. Also, they are underspending on defence to a colossal degree. So just a point, that's really what I had to say.
No, I mean, John, I agree entirely. I mean, we've seen that some of the EU nations, Germany in particular, They haven't met their NATO obligations in terms of defence spending for many, many years, and I think that's wholly unacceptable. I think a European army would be just a bureaucratic, a bureaucratic talking shop. Getting people to agree would be so slow. I think we need to be fleet of foot. We need to be strong. We need to be independent, but we need to know which allies we can depend upon. And
yeah, I do agree. If I can just say, as a mark of respect to the Korean vet, I don't want to upend his contribution to this radio show, but I have up-to-date experience. I have experience of this century, and he saw a very different landscape and a very different world in the Korean War. It's not quite the way he would remember it, and things have changed, and not for the better.
Yeah, I mean, interesting point there from you, John. I agree entirely. You've got to respond to the current situation. We've seen how the EU nations can be a talking shop, and we've seen, in a sense, that we're clearly going to have to invest more in defence. We're clearly going to have to spend more time working with non-US partners to understand, what appetite people have got in these key areas. I mean, I think the point about Korea, though, John, is of course the duration that Western allies have had troops there in order to ensure stability and confidence in that region. You'd agree with that? Of course
I do. Just an interesting remark you made on spending on defence. This current government, and also in its coalition guise, frequently made the boast that we spend one of the highest amounts of money in the world on defence. Well, I can tell you firsthand, the perpetrators of violence on the ground are not afraid of dollars or pounds. The only big thing they're afraid of is numbers of troops. The idea that we're going to allow our army further shrink to well below Waterloo standards is a catastrophic and strategic error, and the same applies to the Royal Navy. It's way, way, way too small. 6 destroyers for 2 aircraft carriers. We need those 6 destroyers just for those 2 aircraft carriers, which means our oceans wide open to predators. So, John, it's not the money, it's proper spending, and it's a shakedown of the Ministry of Defence.
It's all part of the same picture. John, thank you so much for those thoughts, for your service, your experience and knowledge on that matter. It's money, it's capability, it's the ability to have boots on the ground. This is a great topic. It's so important, so vital. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 11, I'm Chloe Colpin. 7 people have died following overcrowding at Kabul airport as the UK offers an extension to the withdrawal. Mass COVID testing could mean a delayed start to term for England's secondary schools. And how Harrison Ford gave a firefighter a retirement to remember. 7 people have died following overcrowding near Kabul airport as thousands attempt to escape Afghanistan. As harrowing scenes continue, there's mounting concern not everyone will make it out before America's withdrawal on the 31st of August. The UK has hinted it will support an extension to that date. Meanwhile, former Prime Minister Tony Blair has accused the US of pulling out of the country with little or no consultation and branded the move imbecilic. And amid the chaos, a healthy baby girl has been born on board a US evacuation flight out of the country. The US Air Mobility Command tweeted stills of the new Afghan mother who was travelling to a German airbase when she went into labour. Mum and baby have been taken to a nearby medical facility and are said to be doing well. Dominic Raab is under mounting pressure to resign following reports the Prime Minister allowed him to stay on holiday while the Taliban advanced on Kabul. The Times says a Whitehall official advised him to return, but he nobbled Boris Johnson, who then agreed to him staying on an extra 2 days at a 5-star resort in Greece. By the time Mr Raab returned on Monday morning, Kabul had fallen. In other news, pupils at England's secondary schools are likely to get an extra week of summer holiday to allow for COVID testing. The delay to the start of term comes as ministers warn parents that this school year will not be business as usual. Families will be asked to test their children twice a week, while many schools say they will stagger the day's start or end times. A UK-wide antibody testing programme is set to be launched for people who test positive for coronavirus. From Tuesday, thousands of adults with a positive COVID result will also be offered a finger prick test, which will help build insight into antibody protection following infection. At least 8 people have died in Mexico after Hurricane Grace tore through the country, bringing torrential rain, floods and mudslides. The storm, which is now making its way north towards the capital, has brought winds of up to 125 miles an hour, with hundreds of thousands of residents losing power. And Hollywood actor Harrison Ford made time to congratulate a retiring firefighter last night. His car happened to pull up outside a central London fire brigade station as Andrew Shaw was finishing his final shift after 31 years of service. The Star Wars actor was pictured wishing him well, which LFB later tweeted. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. Much more in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 11:04 and we've had what I think has been hope you agree, has been a stimulating first hour. Some amazing callers, 2 veterans, one who fought in Korea and one who served in Afghanistan, giving us the benefit of their experiences. And we've got tweets coming in. There's a tweet here saying, thanking me for a fantastic Sunday morning listen. You know, we've had some really important, challenging stuff to discuss in that first hour. But keep your calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. In the second hour, we're going to be hopefully looking at some better news, some good news, in particular on COVID treatments, because there's been so much focus on the vaccines. But I think there hasn't been enough focus and understanding and debate and discussion about the progression of the treatments of dealing with COVID. Because the reality is, as I see it, I think most people see it, there are two ways out of this crisis. One, of course, is the vaccine, but the other, it's just really, really important, is the progression, the progress, finding new treatments, whether that's a new drug or whether it's repurposing an existing drug that can be repurposed, reorganized, so that it actually reduces the severity of COVID. And, you know, I don't think there's been enough debate, enough discussion. And actually, I don't think health journalists have been holding the government to account enough on the progress of treatments. Most of us probably remember, if we've been vaccinated, we know what vaccine we've had. Did we have the Astra? Did we have the Pfizer or Moderna? But how many people actually know, if they've been unfortunate enough to have COVID seriously, do they know what treatment they had? How many people know what treatments have been approved? If you've suffered badly from COVID and you know what treatments you had or didn't have, please do give us a call so you can share your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. And I just want to caveat this whole discussion. Of course, I'm not a doctor, so as we have this discussion, it's important to say do not take any medication in relation to COVID unless, of course, it's been prescribed by a clinician, by your doctor, your GP. But it's important that we're able to discuss and debate this. In the early days, there were promising drugs like remdesivir and dexamethasone. But we hear, I think remdesivir, the promise sort of disappeared as it was taken off the World Health Organization's recommendation list. Dexamethasone is still used quite successfully. There's another drug that is an existing drug that's been used over 4 billion times over the last 50 years, which is called ivermectin. And that is, let's be absolutely clear, the World Health Organization says it should not be used except within a clinical trial, as the evidence of its success or otherwise is inconclusive, and it's not used, it's not approved for use here in the UK or the US. But what is a fact is that ivermectin is being used in numerous other countries around the world, in particular developing nations that weren't able to get vaccines early enough or weren't able to afford them. And it seems to me, whilst there have been numerous small trials on ivermectin, what was lacking was a large clinical trial. And that's why finally, eventually, there is now a large clinical trial that started in late June by the amazing Oxford Principal team looking at ivermectin, some 1,500 plus patients. So that's good news that eventually it is being looked at. I did ask the professors from that trial if they could come on the show today, but they weren't available. Now, I actually wrote to the former health secretary. Do you remember him? Some bloke called Hancock. Yeah, that's the guy. I wrote to him back in March as to why there was no large trial in the UK on ivermectin, given the apparent success in smaller countries. Well, perhaps you're not surprised. It took 3 months for the health department to reply. The Minister, Lord James Bethell, he did finally reply, and he said to me that he hadn't seen any evidence that it worked. This was literally the same time as Oxford, the Oxford Principal started their trial. Well, it seems to me, why didn't they start these trials earlier? And again, I asked Lord Bethell on the show, but he didn't reply. And then the other interesting thing about ivermectin is that it was founded in the 1970s by the huge drug company Merck, massive US pharmaceutical firm, which won a Nobel Peace Prize for ivermectin, used as an anti-parasitic drug very successfully, particularly in African nations. They said, interestingly, in early February, in a press release, and I quote, "Company scientists continue to carefully examine the findings of all available and emerging studies of ivermectin for the treatment of COVID for evidence of efficacy and safety." But they then went on to say, and this is critical, we do not believe that the data available supports the safety and efficacy of ivermectin for COVID. Well, and they expressed a concern about the lack of safety data in some of those other smaller clinical trials elsewhere in the world. What I thought was bizarre was that here's like the godmother of this drug. It was out of patent, but surely did they not feel a sense of ownership, a sense of, they founded this drug? Why were they just looking at other trials? And if they were concerned about the safety of other trials, why didn't they conduct their own large trials to look at this and to understand it as a potential way out of this? Out of interest, the same drugs company, Merck, they've been spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to develop a vaccine. So I did ask the Merck press media team for someone to come on the show to appear, to talk about it. And guess what? Well, they didn't reply either. I'm trying not to take it personally that 3 people didn't accept to come on the show, but and I caveat, of course, again, that whilst we're talking about this, you should only take medication that is prescribed by a doctor. But the really good news that came out on Friday, and it is important to celebrate good news, is that there is a new COVID treatment that's called Ronapreve. I'll say that again because they may be brilliant at designing drugs. I'm not sure they're brilliant at naming them to be really catchy. But anyway, it's called Ronapreve, and that's been developed by the pharmaceutical companies Roche and Regeneron. And that's been approved for treatment for COVID in preventing infection, resolving acute symptoms, and reducing the likelihood of hospital admission. That's directly quoted from the government press release. And it's a combination of 2 antibodies that attacks the COVID virus. And yet, interestingly, here's the thing. The US FDA, they gave an emergency approval for this Ronapreve drug last November. It's now August, and we've only just approved it. Our own MHRA has only just approved it. So the question we should be asking, while celebrating the good news it has been approved, why has it taken all of those 9 or 10 months to approve a drug that was approved in the US last November? If we'd approved it back then, could it literally have saved hundreds of lives? Well, that's the question. I think it's important to really focus on treatments so that people understand them and that we challenge the government. And that's really, vital for our health commentators and journalists. And I'm delighted to be joined by a guest to discuss this further, Professor Peter Hellings of Leuven University in Brussels and the University of Amsterdam, who's a specialist in this field and who's working on his own potential treatments. And so, Peter, very good morning to you. You've heard my thoughts there. Do you agree with my assessment that there's been too much focus on the vaccines and not enough on the potential emerging treatments?
Good morning, Richard. As you know, we all realize that vaccines are important, that vaccines can help to get out of this COVID pandemic, but that vaccines will not be the one and only solution to prevent the virus from keeping on causing damage to the respiratory system, and also making sure that or having patients ending up in emergency care. So I think vaccines are important. There are some issues related to safety, related to the immune system activation by several vaccines. But apart from the vaccines, we also need to focus on the antiviral treatments. And when we talk about efficacy of specific drugs, there is a lot of confusion because efficacy can be defined in 5 different ways. It can prevent mortality of severely ill patients. It could prevent hospitalizations, could prevent patients with mild disease getting into a severely ill state, and it can also prevent the spreading of the virus or even prevent smell reduction and smell loss. So if we talk about efficacy of specific treatment, we need to define what we're talking about, because if a trial with ivermectin fails, if a trial with macrolide fails, that does not mean that this treatment is not effective. These kind of solutions and these kind of drugs are cheap or effective, and may help people with mild disease and prevent people with mild disease developing a severe disease. And that is exactly why I think it's very important to brainstorm about this topic, not only preventing disease by vaccinations, but also focusing in the future on antiviral treatments.
Sure. I mean, that's and so let's just touch on, I mean, how much emphasis are you seeing from governments, whether it's in Brussels or what you understand from happening elsewhere, government spending on research on treatments, because it is clearly so important that we make more progress. I guess, you know, we're always going to be making progress on it, but we need it faster, sooner, with a much greater understanding, in my view.
Well, indeed, the focus of media, the focus of the experts that advise the media has been for 90% on vaccines, which is understandable because it seemed like the most evident and simplest way to get out of this pandemic. But slowly people tend to realize that vaccines may not be the ultimate solution because there may be the need for a third or even fourth vaccine, and that other measures like antiviral treatments that could prevent people from getting infected or could also prevent people from getting a severe disease are actually equally important. But unfortunately, medical research has not focused so much on antiviral treatments in the past because viruses were considered like a self-limiting disease with a disease duration of 5 to 10 days, and that was it. Influenza is an exception, HIV is an exception, and herpes is an exception as well. But coming back to COVID, I do believe that antiviral treatments will be a major step forward. And I see now many initiatives in Europe, in the UK and elsewhere, focusing on novel strategies to get out of this pandemic.
Peter, that's great. If you stay with us, we're just going to take a quick break and then pick this up further because it's such an important issue. The time is 11:17 and you're listening to Tice Talk here on the home of Common Sense, Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. The time is 11:20 and we've been talking about the good news, the progress on treatments for COVID, because as we come out of this pandemic, to build confidence, to build trust and to reduce worry and anxiety, it's so important that people understand that treatments can also help hugely, not just the vaccines. And I think that's really important. I'm delighted that we're talking to someone who's working on treatments in Brussels at the University of Leuven, Professor Peter Hellings. Peter, welcome back. And we were just talking there about the progress of treatments. Do you think that at some point there'll be like a silver bullet treatment that's found that resolves all our worries, or will it be a never-ending process of trying to get better and better treatments as the virus varies?
Well, the answer is multifaceted. On the one hand, we will gain more experience with how to treat in the best possible way patients who end up in emergency or in intensive care. There we have evidence about the efficacy of dexamethasone and other treatments that could prevent people from dying from COVID. That's one aspect. Secondly, we will gain more insight into optimal antiviral treatments that could prevent people from ending up in intensive care and getting a severe COVID-related disease. And last but not least, there are several programs nowadays where all effective and safe treatments are being studied in the context of disease prevention and prevention of transmission of the virus within families. In our research programs, we focus on some existing molecules that could be advised quite soon when we have all the experimental data ready. And these are cheap, effective, and safe treatment molecules that could prevent the virus from spreading and running in families and infecting people in the work and family environment. And I think that's the way forward. I'm also aware of some exciting initiatives at London University hospitals. I'm also aware of the chlorothorin programs in Innsbruck University, where locally applied antiviral treatments, which are considered to be very safe, which are considered to be very effective, can all be recommended and will help us to get out of this pandemic. Because, it will also depend on the virus itself. Indeed. That the virus is not a stable entity. We have good knowledge about the flu virus, where there is a recommendation to get a new vaccine every single year because of the variants that occur. And this may be the same with COVID virus. But on the other hand, I strongly believe that when the virus becomes less potent, less disease-making, that also by the variants that may occur, less people will end up in intensive care. We will get more used to living with this virus, and it will be just like a common cold in the future. That's at least my prediction. So I'm not so scared about the future. I think the future is promising, the future is positive, and there are several initiatives that will be implemented quite soon.
Peter, that's fantastic. And it's so heartening, to be able to talk to someone with your experience, your knowledge, because I do think it is about leadership and about giving confidence that real progress is being made. Because, we know that even if you've taken the vaccine, you've been double jabbed, that we know there is still a much less risk, but there's still a risk of transmission. There's still a risk of being infected. And that's why people have to have that confidence as this virus continues to vary. Peter, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with me and my listeners and viewers here on Talk Radio. Thanks for being with us. That's Peter Hellings, Professor Peter Hellings, an expert on treatments, a professor at the University of Leuven in Brussels. So, and we have got a caller actually to follow up on this, Barry in Norwich, who has specific issues with the being able to take the vaccine. Barry, I think you're there. Good morning to you. Tell us your story and
Well, I'm one of a couple of 2 or 3 million people that can't take the vaccine because of a medical condition. Right. So every day for me personally is an absolute nightmare. Yeah. Freedom Day was not Freedom Day. I go out of the house every day. I stand on public transport. Got people coughing all over me, spluttering all over me. Shops, and I have to tell them, can you put your hand over your mouth? We've had the vaccine. Well, I say, well, some of us haven't because we can't. And every day I just feel like it's only a matter of time that I catch this virus. Yeah, it's only going to be a matter of time.
And so I'm guessing then, Barry, I'm guessing that you've been following progress on the development of treatments with particularly acute interest. Am I right in that?
Well, not really, no, because you don't really hear a lot about them, do you?
And that highlights my concern.
That's why I was glad you were talking about them this morning, because I never heard about this stuff from Roche or anything like that, and and the government don't seem to be putting that across, do they?
I think that's right. I picked it up on Friday morning, but it wasn't hugely covered. There was some coverage, but there's just not enough discussion and information about this. And your situation, it's so important that you've got an understanding of what progress is being made, how long you may have to wait for new treatments that might work for someone with your medical condition.
I mean, I've already been told that this will put me in a hospital bed. Whether it puts me in intensive care or on a ventilator, well, I'm in the laps of the gods. But if it gets hold of me, it will put me in hospital. That's why every day for me is just, when I see people walking about with no masks on and coughing and crushing up to each other and not keeping... why this country didn't make masks mandatory still in shops and public transport and all that sort of stuff, I'll never know. When Scotland did it, and it's legal in Scotland, still got to do it in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, this country seems not to do that.
And so, Barry, what in terms of the treatments as they progress, as new ones are released, and obviously you'll be, I'm sure, very interested in Ronapreve. What will you be looking for? What would you want to hear from the government to give you more confidence that actually, in a sense, it's clearly someone in your position. It's going to be very hard to get back to normal, but you're going to want confidence and reassurance.
I don't think I'll ever get confidence and reassurance from this particular government, to be honest with you, because they've never given me confidence and reassurance from the get-go of this, to be frank. They just haven't. The way they've sort of just, from what they've done, to care homes, and the way they had NHS doctors and paramedics and frontline nurses and then dressed up to begin with in polythene bags. And you
think they've been too slow, too reactive as opposed to proactive?
I have no confidence in Boris Johnson and any member of his government in this pandemic. To be
Barry,
honest,
thank you very much for sharing those thoughts. That's Barry in Norwich, someone who actually does appreciate this discussion on treatments, feels that because of his medical condition he can't actually have the vaccine, and therefore he is still in a vulnerable position, and the issue of treatments and the progress and the new ones coming out is of particular interest. I think we've just got time before the break. No, we haven't quite got time before the break to take the next caller. I'm sorry about that, but we are going to head to the break. We've been talking about this critical issue on my second Sunday Spotlight of the progress of treatments, the good news that was announced on Friday with this new drug, Ronapreve. And we need to hear more from the government. We need to hear more from the people carrying out the trials as to the progress of these treatments. Because callers that we've just heard from, like Barry, it's absolutely vital for them. It's vital, I think, for many people who are anxious, who are worried, to know that there's another way out of this crisis. It's not just the vaccines. Treatments, more treatments are being worked on. There's more money being invested. But we need to know about it. We need the information. We need that transparency. We need that understanding. After the break, after the news, we're going to be talking about universities. You're listening to Tice Talk. I'm Richard Tice, and this is Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Chloe Colpin. 7 people have died following overcrowding at Kabul airport as the UK offers an extension to the withdrawal. Mass COVID testing could mean a delayed start to term for England's secondary schools. And how Harrison Ford gave a firefighter a retirement to remember. 7 people have died following overcrowding near Kabul airport as thousands attempt to escape Afghanistan. As harrowing scenes continue, there's mounting concern not everyone will make it out before America's withdrawal on the 31st of August. The UK has hinted it will support an extension to that date. And amid the chaos, a healthy baby girl has been born on board a US evacuation flight out of the country. The US Air Mobility Command tweeted these pictures of the new Afghan mother who was travelling to a German airbase when she went into labour. Mum and baby have been taken to a nearby medical facility and are said to be doing well. Dominic Raab is under mounting pressure to resign following reports the Prime Minister allowed him to stay on holiday while the Taliban advanced on Kabul. The Times says a Whitehall official advised him to return, but he nobbled Boris Johnson, who then agreed to him staying on an extra 2 days at a 5-star resort in Greece. Pupils at England's secondary schools are likely to get an extra week of summer holiday to allow for COVID testing. The delay to the start of term comes as ministers warn parents that this school year will not be business as usual. And Hollywood actor Harrison Ford made time to congratulate a retiring firefighter last night. His car happened to pull up outside a central London fire brigade station as Andrew Shaw was finishing his final shift after 31 years of service. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. We're halfway through the show. Time is flying. We've been talking about the good news in this hour on my Sunday Spotlight of the progress of treatments. And we had a caller. We just didn't have time before the news for our second caller on this. We've got Peter in Pontefract. Tell us your thoughts on treatments and COVID.
Hello, good morning, Richard. Thank you for taking the call, and well done with the show. Nice to see a bit of common sense continuing through Talk Radio. I've always been a fan.
Thank you.
It was a point I wanted to make with yourself as a sort of a fresh player in this. Just a reset button required, I think. The point I'm trying to make, really, first of all, is the degree that we ought to re-separate coronavirus from COVID-19. One is a virus, the other is a disease, which develops or may not develop subsequently to finding you catch the virus. And the language has been irritatingly manipulated, I think.
Yeah, and
you know what I mean? You can't catch a disease. You can't.
And Peter, what's your background? Are you a doctor? Or are you?
No, I'm a businessman.
Right, and you're a manufacturer.
I'm a manufacturer in Bradford. All our staff, 146 of them, all caught what we thought was that year's bad flu and bronchial infection in November and December 2019. We've got 6 factories in China, staff returning every 2 or 3 days. We developed what we thought was just that year's disease. We all got over it. We're all between 30 and 60, myself included. We got over it.
Exactly, because of course COVID essentially, I mean, COVID is, there are a number of coronaviruses, of which, COVID is one, and it's about, ultimately, it's a crisis that Withers have been talking about with vaccines and treatments. We have to learn to live with it. It feels to me, Peter, that the language has been, amongst all the, the anxiety, the language has been too slow, that we've got to find ways to learn to live with this. And it sounds like you're on that page.
Richard, it's not so long ago that Chris Whitty announced and told us about SARS-CoV-2, the virus. He then went on to say it takes 19 to 23 days to develop into D, COVID, the disease. They're separate. They're related, but they're separate. The best immunity you can get is to catch coronavirus, develop your own T-cell and antibody immunity and get over it. From that point on, you are immune.
Exactly. Well, look, Peter, the thing is, obviously, on a talk show, if one's not a medic, a doctor, we can't give medical advice, but we can talk about, in a sense, the benefits of the benefits of treatments. We can talk about the vaccines, different people, different ways out of this, and how we give confidence to people. And it's interesting, you as a manufacturer, your staff being ill so early in this crisis, essentially before we knew there was a crisis, because you've got people coming back from China. Fascinating insight there. Thank you, Peter. But I just caveat the whole treatment thing. Obviously, you shouldn't take any medication unless it's been prescribed by a medical professional. Well, treatment is important. Our next subject is also important. Young people, students, our children, and we've got a strange situation, perhaps it's not that strange, where we've got the first university that said it's going to ban students unless they've been double jabbed. So this is potentially, this is the sort of divisive, discriminatory division, almost like a sort of form of vaccine apartheid that seems to be being coerced onto young people. I'm delighted this Sunday morning we've got the co-founder of Us For Them, Molly Kingsley, to discuss this. I know, Molly, you've been working since the very early days to ensure that children are not ignored and that their education is front stage in this, and you've been battling away valiantly. Good morning, and what are your thoughts to this story about this University of Hartbury?
Yeah, hi Richard. Hi, thanks for having me on. It's not really surprising, is it, at this point? But I think it is a bit shocking. I think, as you say, and you put it very well, it's discriminatory. It's borderline coercive, I think, actually, because what they've not said. Let's be clear, they've not said that children won't get their education, but they've said, well, they can't stay, they can't use our accommodation, which of course we've now heard from a number of these parents has the same effect. These kids, it's a residential course, so if they're not allowed to reside, they don't get to do the course. And they've also said that you can't join in social or sporting activities. Is that right? Yes, exactly. That's right. And I think another point actually on this is that it is students as well, but it's also 16 and 17-year-olds. So these are kids. And I think, throughout this, the point to make here is, of course, anyone that wants the vaccine should get the vaccine and be encouraged to have the vaccine, of course. But that needs to be a matter of fully informed voluntary consent. And when you start denying children of education or educational sort of ancillary things, the social side of it, it's not informed consent, is it? It's coercive, and it's incredibly unfair, and it's also all quite sinister, I think. And what you've got so many parents in your group. You may indeed have heard from parents of students who are either at Hartbury or thinking of going to Hartbury. What's your sort of sense as to how this is going down amongst those parents? Yeah, I mean, of course. So we were alerted to this story a few days ago. Actually, it came in via our group, and parents were really, really upset. And of course, Hartbury have put out a statement saying, "Oh, it's what the vast majority of our students want." Well, that is certainly not what we've heard. And if you look, I don't know if you saw yesterday, Hartbury was trending on Twitter. Now, that was not for the right reasons. This idea that everyone wants it and it's fine certainly didn't seem to be what people were saying on social media. Sorry, go on.
Well, Hartbury College and University is probably not a name that was on our listeners and viewers' top list of universities that they were aware of. But it is obviously a very specialist college. How concerned are you that this is just the beginning of the thin end of the wedge of other universities adopting a similar approach?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the first thing to say is DofE have made a very clear statement that they do not encourage it, but that is a very far away. It's far away from actually them coming out and banning it. And I think one of the things we have seen time and time again throughout this pandemic is that these rules, whether it's schools, universities, or early years, actually these rules give a lot of discretion to school leaders, to university leaders, and actually that discretion is often abused, and that's what's happened here. So I am not hopeful that this will be an isolated incident. It may not be countrywide. I looking at it, I can't see how it's legal, and I think that's a comment that's been made a lot. It's discriminatory. It also raises all kinds of issues for students who are partway through their course. It's a fundamental change to the terms and conditions. But,
Completely.
Will it be the only incident? I assume it probably won't be.
Look, Molly, stay with us. We're going to take a quick break, but I also want to talk about some of the other breaking educational stories about secondary schools being delayed, potentially delayed in their return to school. Stay with us. The time is 11:42. It's 11:42. You're listening to Tice Talk on this rather grey morning, even though it's August. And this is, of course, Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back. You are listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 11:45. We've been talking about treatments, but now we've been talking about education and the critical issue of universities. The first university trying to insist that students are double jabbed before being able to stay at the university. So much more. I need your input, your thoughts, your tweets. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, so that we can get your thoughts. We've got time for callers later on this hour. We've been talking to the co-founder of Us For Them, Molly Kingsley, on this issue. You know, Molly, I know you're concerned, really concerned about what may happen in universities, but also let's look at the secondary schools. There's rumours coming out this weekend that union leaders are, looking at encouraging a sort of a delay of secondary schools coming back to term in September in order to ensure that 16 and 17-year-olds have been vaccinating. What are you hearing on this, and what are the implications?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's a wild, wild west out there, isn't it? So there's all kinds of issues with schools, I think. I think the first thing is you've got this story today about, the disrupted start to the school term, which I think is testing, I think, actually, isn't it? It's all these asymptomatic children, so healthy children who, once again, it seems to be too much to let them get back to school normally. This is the third year that we've had pandemic disruption.
So it's more of a delay for testing rather than vaccination, is it?
Well, that was my understanding. I might be wrong on that, but the report in the Times seems to say it was testing. And I think because you've got huge numbers of secondary school pupils being tested, and query at this point why we are doing that at all. We know that 90% of the adult population have antibodies from vaccination or infection, and that's great. Why are we assuming another school year here of disruption? And
are you concerned that there's going to be continuing demand for children to wear masks or to continue in bubbles and be sent home the first sign of any potential COVID within a class group or a year group?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So I think first point to make here, and credit where credit is due, the rules and new guidance for schools looks better on paper than it did last year. Now that's not saying much. Exactly. We ended last term with 1 million healthy pupils sitting around at home, so it couldn't be much worse. But it does look better. However, the same flaws are hardwired into this guidance. So we have a regime here which effectively allows for break clauses to children's education. So, if there are the rules say 5 COVID cases within a school, we are back into this system of bubbles and disruption. And, there's some not mad thing about, we'll move lessons outside. Well, of course, that's not going to happen. So what will happen is that once again, head teachers will be closing down year groups, potentially even whole schools in extreme cases. Now, we now know already, term's not even started, and NEU have already come out and said, well, actually, forget this 5 cases in the school. We're going to do this on 2 cases. So 2 cases in a school, we're back into bubbles, we're back into disruption. Likewise, the same provision is there for masks. Masks are not required, they're not advised. But they may be reintroduced. And we know at the end, I will stop ranting in 1 second, but we know at the end of last term, even though the DofE was very clear that masks were not to be worn, 1 in 5 local councils were mandating masks in schools. So, it is a wild west. The local councils and unions just ignore this guidance.
So what we're really saying is actually, once again, it comes back to this critical word, leadership. And rather than have a wild west out there where you're reliant on the confidence and the courage of head teachers, governing bodies, local authorities, who understandably are probably going to take the path of sort of the easiest path. We actually need some proper leadership from the Department of Education, some proper confident leadership from the almost permanently missing Secretary of State, Gavin Williamson, into this issue, so that parents can have the confidence that the children will be back at school, that they won't have to wear masks, and therefore that their education won't continue to be disrupted in the disastrous way that it has been over the last 18 months.
I think that's exactly right, Richard. I think we need someone with, and at this point one wonders whether Williamson is ever going to be up to this job. He certainly hasn't looked like it so far, but we need someone with the courage and the guts to take on the unions and actually to mandate that children stay in school. We've learned time and time again that when we give schools discretion, although in normal circumstances, I'm sure that makes sense, but we learned time and time again that it is being abused. It is a race to the bottom. And these children have lost so much. It really, really is time to put them first. It was time to put them first a year ago, but they have to be put first now.
Absolutely, of course. I mean, as you say, they should have been put first all the way through. They weren't. I think, in a sense, in many occasions, they were literally put to the bottom of the pile. And the consequences, I fear that we will feel for years to come. I suspect, Molly, that your job is not done and that you're going to be battling on this for months to come. We have to give confidence and courage to our leaders that actually, there's huge progress on the vaccines. I've talked earlier in this show about the progress with treatments, and our leaders, whether they are union leaders, whether they are, the governors, head teachers, we have to have the confidence that we're actually learning to live with this virus, that mercifully, at the moment, children are the least likely to suffer badly from the virus, and they are the most important in terms of being the future generation. Any last words from you? I mean, you've just got an ongoing task, I suspect.
Yeah, sadly, and it gives me no pleasure to say it, I think you're right. I think we are looking at a third year of really heavily disrupted education at all levels, unless we do something about it. I would like to understand why we aren't at this point cloning Sweden on schools. I think they have done very well. They didn't close schools. There was a report out today. They have not suffered the same educational deficit as we have. And the key thing they do differently, it's not rocket science, Richard, but they keep healthy children in school and unhealthy ones stay off. Why aren't we doing that? Surely it is time that we copied that approach.
Well, good luck in continuing to get that message through. Literally on behalf of the children of all our listeners and viewers, Molly, thanks for all the hard work, efforts that you and your team are putting forward. And I think it is so important to learn to learn lessons from other countries who are doing things differently, who might be doing it better. And Sweden, in terms of how they have protected children's education, they are a shining beacon. And I think Molly is absolutely right there. Thank you for that. We've just got time for a caller. David in Durham is on the line to talk about, I think, Afghanistan. David, good morning to you. Have we got David there? We seem to have lost David in the melee of technology. Maybe the calls dropped through the unbelievable cloud that's just descending on us. The August gloom here in London. We've been talking about the issues to do with the good news about treatments, which is great, and we have now got David back from Durham. Hi there, David. Good morning. Welcome. What did you want to say? I think about Afghanistan.
Yeah. Good morning. Yeah, you're a great show. You're a great presenter. You sound great.
Thank you, David.
Anyway. Yeah. Right. My comment is this, quite simply, about Afghanistan and about terrorism in the world generally. We never hear any condemnation, indeed any comments, from the so-called moderate Muslims in this country. Birmingham, Leicester, all the mosques and everything like that. We never hear anything. Why don't we get them involved in what's going on in the world? Why do we never hear anything? That's all I'm saying.
No, but thank you for that comment, David. And if there are any are any leaders, of the mosques, of the some Muslim groups who are listening, who want to call in, it would be great. I think it is so important that there is more open discussion, more open debate about all of these issues, and more condemnation of these extremists of the Taliban, because we have to have the confidence and the courage to debate this in the open, but to know that there is a much, much better way. If we'd had the courage as the NATO allies, as the US, to stay the course in Afghanistan, and we're hearing sort of day by day, the growing atrocities, to the horror of us all, and I think it really is important to continue to condemn that. So, David, thank you very much for that observation. We're approaching the top of the hour. We've focused so far on two key issues. We focused on the importance of what happens next with China, how they may respond to the crisis in Afghanistan, the extent to which China is going to try to extend their influence, their footprint in Afghanistan, and how they might react with Taiwan, which is a really, really critical economy, very important economy for the West. Vital that, in my view, that China does not try to unify Taiwan in this period of perceived weakness in the leadership of the superpower of the free world, the United States. We've also been talking about the good news of treatments of Ronapreve, which was announced on Friday. I really do urge these drug companies, please come up with some more sparky, easier to say names of these new drugs, these repurposed drugs, as they come forward. And we had a great call from someone who couldn't take the vaccine and therefore is particularly interested in the progress of the treatments, because and he still essentially is isolating in his own private personal lockdown because of the difficulties that he perceives because of his medical conditions. And it's really important for us to understand that as we come out of of this crisis. And so I do think that treatments are ever more important. The time is approaching 11:58. You've been listening to the second hour of my show, Tice Talk, here on the home of common sense, the epicentre of common sense. It is, of course, Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 12, I'm Chloe Culpen. NATO confirms at least 20 deaths at Afghanistan's main airport in the last week as the Taliban asks for clarity on the foreign forces' exit. COVID testing pushes back the start of term for England's secondary schools. And how Harrison Ford gave a firefighter a retirement to remember. NATO say at least 20 people have died following overcrowding at Kabul airport in the last week. Thousands are attempting to escape Afghanistan after the Taliban swept to power a week ago today. As harrowing scenes continue, the Defence Secretary says no nation will be able to get everyone out before America's withdrawal on the 31st of August. Ben Wallace says the UK will support an extension to that date. Meanwhile, the Taliban is asking for clarity on when foreign forces will leave and says the country's schools and colleges can reopen. Amid the chaos, a healthy baby girl has been born on board a US evacuation flight out of the country. The US Air Mobility Command tweeted these pictures of the new Afghan mother who was travelling to a German airbase when she went into labour. Mum and baby have been taken to a nearby medical facility and are said to be doing well. Dominic Raab is under mounting pressure to resign following reports the Prime Minister allowed him to stay on holiday while the Taliban advanced on Kabul. The Times says a Whitehall official advised him to return, but he nobbled Boris Johnson, who then agreed to him staying on an extra 2 days at a 5-star resort in Greece. By the time Mr Raab returned on Monday morning, Kabul had fallen. Pupils at England's secondary schools are likely to get an extra week of summer holiday to allow for COVID testing. The delay to the start of term comes as ministers warn parents that this school year will not be business as usual. Families will be asked to test their children twice a week, while many schools say they will stagger the day's start or end times. A UK-wide antibody testing programme is set to be launched for people who test positive for coronavirus. From Tuesday, thousands of adults with a positive COVID result will also be offered a finger prick test to help build insight into antibody protection. Hundreds of residents on the US's East Coast are being urged to prepare for Hurricane Henry, one of the most powerful storms in decades. Heavy rain has already caused disruption in New York City and New Jersey, with flooding in some parts overnight. A state of emergency has been declared in the city, with winds up to 75 miles an hour expected. And Hollywood actor Harrison Ford made a time to congratulate a retiring firefighter last night. His car happened to pull up outside a central London fire brigade station as Andrew Shaw was finishing his final shift after 31 years of service. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. Much more in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back and good afternoon. Yes, this is the final hour. We've been going for 2 hours. There's been lots to discuss on my Sunday spotlights about China, Taiwan, and of course on the good news around treatments. But now as we move into the third hour, as a committed Brexiteer, there's an issue that's really taken my interest and some anxiety recently, because in the world of corporate takeovers, buying and selling businesses, I've been concerned to see, yes, I believe in global Britain, but what I don't believe is that we should be selling Britain, selling the best of British firms, our tech firms, our defence firms, to overseas buyers. In particular, we shouldn't be selling important strategic assets in the worlds of technology or defence to companies from China, which of course essentially, if you're a Chinese company, you're essentially under the whim of the Chinese Communist Party. And so at the moment, there are not one, not two, but three significant takeovers going on. There is a China-owned group that's trying to buy a key semiconductor chip manufacturer here in the UK, Newport Wafer Fab. And I talked earlier about the importance of semiconductor chips. The last thing in the world we should be doing, in my view, is allowing a Chinese firm to acquire a key British manufacturer of high-tech goods like semiconductor chips. Secondly, there's a US private equity group called Advent. 2 years ago, they acquired a UK-based defence group called Cobham. They promised that they wouldn't break it up, that they wouldn't sell it down quickly, and sure enough, surprise, surprise, 18 months or so later, it appears that they've sold some 50%, give or take, of the group. And now they are trying to buy another UK business, Ultra Electronics, in a huge, almost £3 billion deal. And the thing about these private equity groups is that they have a business plan, and their objective is to buy a business and to grow it fast over a 3 or 4 year period, to use clever financial engineering, and then to flog it on. But the world of technology, the world of defence businesses, these are really key strategic industries that, in my view, we need to be maintaining the majority stake in British ownership. There's a third business called Meggitt, another UK stock market listed firm that's in the middle of a bidding war between, I think, two US groups. Another huge deal, over £7 billion. This is for a defence and aerospace company. And again, should we be allowing these sales to take place? Well, I'm delighted that it looks like the UK government is finally showing a bit of resolve and a bit of courage in saying, actually, this may not be in our strategic interest. And so they are looking at whether or not these takeovers should be allowed. Now, as I say, I believe in global Britain, but we shouldn't be selling Britain, some of the crown jewels of our technologies, of our businesses, off on the cheap. And so I'm delighted to be joined now by the investment manager of Seven Investment Management, Justin Urquhart Stewart, who's decades of experience in the stock markets. And Justin may have an update on the likelihood of these potential takeovers taking place. And he may disagree with me. He may have a more completely open, free market approach to corporate activity, to business activity. A very good afternoon to you, Justin. So hopefully you've heard my thoughts there. What's the stock market sense about the stance that the government is going to take in these takeover bids by overseas
they're
groups?
very conflicted indeed. You're quite right to raise this as a very serious issue indeed, because there was an old Genesis record a few years back selling England by the pound. And I have to say, that's what it feels like sometimes. But you've got a combination of issues here. You've got some strategic assets which are really important to this country. And the government, if it decides to use that old-fashioned phrase of grow a pair, actually start having strategic golden shares in some of these companies. That's not anti-capitalist at all. It's being strategic, actually making sure some of these vital businesses, particularly in terms of just their technology, their intellectual property, aren't sold elsewhere. And I'm afraid corporate promises don't count for a great deal, whether you're in high tech or, remember, Cadbury's. Remember, they're not going to be sold down the river and actually ship off manufacturing elsewhere. 6 months later, went straight off to Eastern Europe. Also, the issue, as you mentioned, private equity. Private equity has good side, bad side. Good, because it's investing. Bad, often too short term. 3 years is not a long term. Shareholder investing should be 7 years at least. And that's what I want to see on this. So the good news is we're really, really good at setting up business, particularly high-tech businesses. Where we're really bad as is financing actually the growing businesses to give them the strength so that they should be the ones on the attacking side, not trying to keep their freedom.
Well, Justin, how did you know that I'm a lifelong Genesis fan? And that's extraordinary. But you're so right in that, and I'm delighted to hear you agree with me, I think, that the government, we shouldn't be selling off these British assets, to build a big defence group or to invest in technology. It takes years and years and years, and it's vital that we retain that. So just explain a bit more about the idea of government taking a stake in sort of stock market listed businesses, how it works, because it's not something that frankly the government of whatever persuasion has really been very good at, except in the financial crisis. Explain how that would work and how it would be received by UK institutions and investors in the city.
Most institutions would accept it because we've had it in the past. We had, for example, this golden share. We had it in actually British Airways for a while because in times of emergencies, you may well need to actually say, we need to borrow your planes, mate, and we're going to have those. We used to have it with P&O ferries as well because maybe we actually need to be able to move soldiers down to, I don't know, the Falklands or something. And so there were always the ability to have this special share to be able to make sure that strategic companies could be used. Otherwise, you could find yourself at risk or at control for somebody else. You want to see an international version of that at the moment, look no further than Germany, where the agreement they've got at the moment with Nord Stream 2, with the Russians providing gas to Germany. To what extent would Putin ever possibly put the bare paw on that gas pipeline? No, you need to make sure you've got strategic control of your assets. Doesn't mean government ownership, it just means some strategic assets are too precious to us. But then on the other hand, we need to encourage further investment into these tech areas. We're very good at it, actually. We should be flattered they want to buy these companies.
Of course.
But we should wake up and actually find more mechanisms for making sure they've got more capital to protect themselves.
But why is it, Justin, that these private equity groups can justify paying huge premiums over the prevailing share price of these stock market British listed companies? What's happening here? Is the stock market undervaluing these businesses? Is it taking too short-term an approach? Is it too focused on dividends, not capital growth? What is it? How do my listeners understand why the stock market's getting it wrong and these overseas-owned private equity groups seem to be getting it right and therefore disappearing with all the cash?
And you're right. It's a combination of issues. None of them are exactly the same. A certain amount of these companies have been undervalued and the market hasn't seen the value. But also, these private equity companies have the ability to raise cash, well, you look at interest rates now, at virtually nil cost, and to be able to then lever up, borrow up, to be able to then go and buy these assets and invest in them. Or maybe actually they just borrow more money on the company's balance sheet and then sell it on in due time, maybe to say 3 years. The problem's always been is we've got short-term investing in longer-term businesses. We need to encourage longer-term investing and not just in London. Remember, you go back a few years back and show what an old fart I am, but back in 1945, there were 45 stock exchanges in Britain. Most were useless, but there were 7. And the whole idea was to raise local money for local businesses for the medium to long term. We've forgotten that now, and I'm afraid an awful lot of trading now is sort of considered much, much too short term, and we need greater strategic thinking. What can the government do? Not buy things, but they can create greater tax incentives for longer term investment and returns. That's how you try and do that. And we need some more initiative in the city, something I've always tried to do, not always very successfully, but move it on to make sure we can use, not just protect, but be able to develop this vital part of our economy.
And so, Justin, you talk about the ability of the private equity groups to raise lots of money because interest rates are cheap. So to which I guess the question is, well, why can't the stock market listed firms, why can't they raise as much money? If they want to invest more in growing the business, investing in future technology, why is the city so short term? Why can't these businesses, and maybe should the government itself, in a sense, be willing to invest as these businesses raise more money to give confidence to the fundraising, to give confidence to institutions and confidence to the business? I actually think this is a really key issue that we haven't focused on enough in the past and is vital to grow UK PLC.
Well, yes, and forgive me for talking my own book, but one of the things I'm doing at the moment is going back to setting up regional investment exchanges so you can have longer term investment for companies to be able to grow and develop. The trouble is, unfortunately, the tax system has meant that it's actually better for certain investment companies to take a more short-term view of life, take a profit and run. If you were being cynical about it, some would say asset stripping. Well, that has happened in the past. Others would be trying to make it, give it a more efficient balance sheet, which means putting more debt on it. That's not always very clever. You only have to look at some of the retail businesses like Debenhams that disappeared after having so much debt weighed on it.
Yes.
No, we need some more initiative here, and the government can help, not with money, although I do believe in the golden share being useful, but actually using the tax system to encourage greater investment, particularly into growing businesses, to make sure that the future is seen here. And investment comes in from overseas, but they don't have to buy the wretched thing overall, and we shouldn't just be letting them go.
I mean, and this, I'm entirely in agreement with that, Justin. Bizarrely, and this may surprise some of my listeners and viewers, I actually had a discussion with none other than the Labour MP, John McDonnell, a couple of years ago, because he actually had the idea, I think a similar idea, of wanting to promote regional investment banks with a longer term investment horizon. And I think regardless of one's political persuasion, actually, where there's a good idea, we should be promoting it. And I think this government has been woefully slow in pursuing that.
It's a strategic asset, particularly for the government thinking about the Red Wall. They need more money into those areas, and there are lots of good businesses up there. I'm pleased to say, actually, some of this has started. I've seen now 3 local regional businesses, 2 in the southwest, 1 in the northeast, getting that sort of longer-term capital, quite often local money, but also some from elsewhere around the country. And you're seeing greater cross-pollination across the country. And of course, the fees are not London fees. They're significantly cheaper, and therefore making it much more effective, cost-effective. But I'm afraid we need to educate investment markets as well. Think longer term. If you want to have a punt, that's why we have horse racing.
Justin, stay with us. We're going to take a quick break, but I've got a couple more questions afterwards. The time is 12:17. You're listening to Richard Tice here on my show Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio, and we're talking about the critical issue of whether or not we should be allowing key strategic British businesses to be sold to the highest bidder, particularly if it's bidders from China or overseas owned private equity groups. And we've got Justin Urquhart, Stewart, a very experienced investment manager from Seven Investment Manager, on the line. And Justin, you were just talking then about the tax regime, that we need more tax incentives to keep businesses. Hopefully that means you agree with me that instead of increasing company tax, corporation tax under this government's proposals to 25%, that actually we should be cutting corporation tax to create higher growth and more investment here into the UK. Is that where you're coming from?
Yeah, it is. That's one of the issues, certainly, because actually corporation tax, you look at the overall income for the government, actually isn't that big.
That's right.
There are only two main taxes in this country. You've got VAT, and then you've got income tax and national insurance, which of course are roughly one and the same. After that, it's relatively small. It's not obviously billions, yes, but in comparison, no, find better ways of incentivizing the economy by giving more tax breaks for investments in the UK in these companies. Greater incentive to make sure actually that by holding the investments for longer, you're getting greater benefit, and encouraging also investors in by way of, we've already got the enterprise investment scheme, which is really good, but make that over a longer term and broaden it out to encourage longer term British investors, particularly things like pension funds, but also individuals as well, as increasingly we're having to look after ourselves. There's a lot the government can do without having to spend money to actually make it much more dynamic, to raise not just for existing businesses, but you go to the business parks in some of these high-tech areas, they're really exciting businesses in the future, and they need more capital coming through. There's no shortage of money. Someone took the plumbing away, and that's what we've got to put back.
So we need long-term incentives to hold and keep and invest in British businesses. And just finally, Justin, just talk a little bit about the protections that the government needs to insist on if there are these acquisitions of big UK businesses, strategic businesses, in order to make sure that some of these acquirers don't renege on them within sort of 12 to 24 months.
Well, the trouble is, of course, we're dealing with international businesses. And so what we can try and enforce over here, once ownership's moved elsewhere, isn't necessarily enforceable elsewhere. But you could actually, the government could take a strategic one golden share holding in those particular companies to actually say they still have the right to participate. And it has to be written into the terms of the articles of the business themselves. But this is not impossible. Now, you obviously argue as to which ones are strategic, which are not. You may say it's about Big Brother stepping in. No. This is strategic control of key specific assets. We're not talking about retail outlets and things like that. No. But we've got items who are dealing with our defence forces, our nuclear procurement and things like that. I'm afraid we need that being run here, not out of Beijing.
Absolutely, without any question at all. Justin, thank you so much for talking so much common sense here on Talk Radio about the importance of not only investing in great British businesses, strategic British businesses, but also providing tax incentives and protecting them. In the event that a business is sold to an overseas owner, those protections have to be absolutely rock solid, and that involves the government taking a strategic share, taking a stake in a business. Justin Urquhart, Stewart, huge thanks. We'll no doubt speak again. This issue is so important. As a Brexiteer, yes, I believe in global Britain, but no, I do not believe in selling important, strategic, fantastic British businesses overseas. We've got to take a long-term view about investing in British jobs, British skills, British technology. That is part of being a bold, ambitious global Britain. But you may disagree. You might be completely in favour of anybody owning our businesses, in which case give us a call either way. 0344 499 1000. Tell me if you agree with me or you don't agree. You think that Justin and I have got it wrong. Now, we've just got time, I think, for a caller. we've got Rhys in Swansea, a caller to discuss thoughts on the drug discussion that we were having earlier on the show. Rhys, good afternoon. Are you there? What's your thoughts on drug treatments?
Good afternoon, Richard. Good news and bad news.
Right.
The bad news first. The treatment that you mentioned this morning was discussed with Calvin Robertson yesterday on Talk Radio by Dr. Simon Clark, a virologist from Reading. And he said that the drug was extremely expensive, and the only way that you get it is if you're at high risk or have got COVID. So it wasn't to be viewed as, I haven't had the vaccine.
Yes.
Can I have that as an alternative?
So there's
just like remdesivir and toximilizab. Remember that? That was £915 or so ago.
So that's the bad news. That's the bad news, Rhys. I'll come back to that. What's your good news?
The good news is that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and zinc are dead cheap and have been around from the beginning of the pandemic for use.
That's right. But of course, at the moment, they've not yet been approved for use here in the UK. So, as I said before, you're right in that we're certainly with ivermectin, it's an existing generic drug, and therefore that is cheap if it does get approved, which it hasn't yet been. And so, we reiterate the caveat that people shouldn't take medication unless it's been approved and prescribed by a clinician. But I take your point. Equally, Rhys, I would say that on the question of cost of this newly approved drug, Ronapreve, well, given how many billions we've spent, and I would argue not very well, on test, track and trace, actually, if it's about a treatment that's going to save lives, then yes, £1,000 to £2,000, which is the sort of suggested cost of this drug, sounds a lot. Actually, if you can save hundreds of lives because of it, given the potential of this newly approved drug, well, I would argue, frankly, that's cheap at the price, because it's about giving us confidence to get going. We had a caller earlier, I think it was Barry, who couldn't have the vaccine. And someone like that needs that confidence to know that, in a sense, regardless of cost. But this is the issue, isn't it, Rhys, which is that, it's the incentive of the big drug companies. Are they overly focused on developing expensive new drugs as opposed to being involved in repurposing existing, much, much, much lower cost drugs? I guess that's...
I'm sorry, it's worse than that, Richard. The lower cost repurposed drugs have not been used, have been taken out of use in order to pave the way for expensive drugs to be brought in for use. Ivermectin, its use has been championed in America by a group of doctors headed by a guy called Dr. Pierre Corrie, who's listen to his job title, Associate Professor of Medicine, Pulmonologist and ICU specialist.
And you're right, Rhys.
COVID-19 patients.
Yeah, and there are people. I'm aware of that particular specialist who's been, very positive about ivermectin. But of course, equally, the other side of the coin, America's CDC still advises against it. The World Health Organization says that it should only be used as part of a professional clinical trial. So, look, I think the point is that we need these treatments, these potential treatments. We need more focus on them, faster, earlier trials to take place, because they're all going to play a vital role in getting out of this pandemic. These treatments, whether they're repurposed or whether they're new treatments, as well as the vaccine. Thank you very much, Rhys, for that thought. The time is 12:30. We're heading off to the news. You've been listening this afternoon to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Chloe Culpen. NATO confirm at least 20 deaths at Afghanistan's main airport in the last week as the Taliban asked for clarity on the foreign forces' exit. And how Harrison Ford gave a firefighter a retirement to remember. NATO say at least 20 people have died following overcrowding at Kabul airport in the last week. Thousands are attempting to escape Afghanistan after the Taliban swept to power a week ago today. As harrowing scenes continue, the Defence Secretary says no nation will be able to get everyone out before America's withdrawal on the 31st of August. But amid the chaos, a healthy baby girl has been born on board a US evacuation flight out of the country. The US Air Mobility Command tweeted these pictures of the new Afghan mother who was travelling to a German airbase when she went into labour. Dominic Raab is under mounting pressure to resign following reports the Prime Minister allowed him to stay on holiday while the Taliban advanced on Kabul. The Times says a Whitehall official advised him to return, but he nobbled Boris Johnson, who then agreed to him staying on an extra 2 days at a 5-star resort in Greece. Pupils at England's secondary schools are likely to get an extra week of summer holiday to allow for COVID testing. The delay to the start of term comes as ministers warn parents that this school year will not be business as usual. And Hollywood actor Harrison Ford made time to congratulate a retiring firefighter last night. His car happened to pull up outside a central London fire brigade station as Andrew Shaw was finishing his final shift after 31 years of service. Those are your headlines on Talk Radio TV. Much more in half an hour.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Chloe Colpin. 7 people have died following overcrowding at Kabul airport as the UK offers an extension to the withdrawal. Mass COVID testing could mean a delayed start to term for England's secondary schools. And how Harrison Ford gave a firefight.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
I can't believe it. We're into the last half an hour of my second show, Tice Talk. It's just after 12:30, and of course, we need to talk about sport. And so who better to discuss what's going on in the world of sport than with Tom Clayton, TalkSport journalist. Now, Tom, the first subject, sadly, is a serious, difficult subject because we had the news last week that the incredible footballer Denis Law, Manchester United guru, international footballer with Scotland, that he is now suffering with dementia. And then there's more news literally overnight, I think, Tom, about a huge hero of mine, great Liverpool player, Terry McDermott, much younger than Denis Law. He too, it seems, is suffering with dementia. Give our listeners some thoughts, some context. What's going on here, Tom, and how, what are the implications?
Yeah, and first of all, I will just say it is absolutely tragic that this is happening. I think we're getting to the point now where we are seeing those first effects that, well, we didn't see things like this happening to the previous generation because heading only became a fashionable thing made by Real Madrid in the 1960s, of course, and it all kind of took off around the whole of Europe. And I think now is around the time that we were expecting to see this kind of thing happen. To put it into context, Dennis Law, you mentioned earlier on this week, he was diagnosed with dementia, the 7th member of Manchester United's 1968 FA Cup team to be diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's or some kind of related issue with the brain. And I think it's a very common issue. Sadly, it's an issue we're going to see a lot more of over the coming years, and I don't think there's going to be an awful lot we can do, because it was only in the 1990s, the 2000s, that much lighter footballs came in, and even we're only just seeing change happen now. So it does make it it brings us a stark reality of what's to come with the names who we could get. We saw the documentary last year of Jack Charlton, his final days battling with it. It's heartbreaking.
Absolutely heartbreaking, because I think I'm right in saying that about half of the World Cup squad from 1966 have suffered from dementia. So it is heartbreaking, and the implications going forward. You talk about lighter balls. Is there much sort of work or study going on into the difference in the balls, the footballs, the weight of them, as to whether that's going to make a difference? Or do you think there's going to be a debate about actually less heading or what? In particular, Tom, for young people, for children in schools, learning football and heading. Where do you see this debate going?
Well, we've seen this debate discussed for quite a few years now, actually, since we did start getting these diagnoses of dementia, of Alzheimer's, and it has affected how school children, how youngsters are taught to play football. So we're seeing that in certain aspects of training nowadays, professional footballers from the Premier League down to grassroots level, they can only head the ball a certain number of times in training, because the issue is, it's not necessarily the one or two headers you might have in a single game. It's the fact that some players may go through 50 headers in a single training session. And that's where the issue was. So they're looking now at... Well, I know that last year we had publication of news that, school children in Scotland were going to be... they were not allowed categorically to head the ball before the age of 12. Because it can... If you affect that formative time of the year... of their age, it does get to a point where you think, well, how much of an effect not only is this going to have when they're older, but even in their sort of young age, around the mid-20s, around the 30s, could it have an effect there? Maybe not with Alzheimer's or dementia, but with certain brain injuries.
And Tom, is there much research going on funded by the FA or the government, the universities? How much is this really properly being looked at and studied so that we learn fast on this?
Yeah, there are inquests going on all the time certainly into past football, into modern football. Modern football changes on a daily basis with the technology that's being brought in. Footballs, as I say, nowadays are much lighter. That's come from, well, not only sporting companies trying to make football more exciting and more flashy, it's also coming from research companies saying what's going to be the safest way to play football in the future. Because, balls are much lighter, they're much more cushioned for that sort of thing nowadays. But the problem is there's the research that goes in, unless they take away heading altogether from the game, I'm not sure we're going to see much of a change from the status quo at the moment, which is very sad from where we are, because it's a very sad state of affairs. But modern football relies an awful lot on heading, so it'll be interesting to see how they change it.
Okay, so and I want to talk about rugby, both union and league as well, because obviously concussion in rugby union is a huge issue. Is there a sort of a clear crossover into rugby and the implications for rugby union and rugby league?
Yes, there absolutely is. It's less to do with the ball, because ball 99% of the time is in hand or on boot. And this is more actually to do with collisions. Interestingly enough, I had to finish my rugby union playing career due to concussions. I've suffered 3 in the space of about a year, hence why I went into news. hence why I'm reporting it rather than playing it. Yes, but no, it is a very serious issue. There is actually a lawsuit ongoing with former rugby union players and becoming now rugby league players as well, who are suing organisations, who are suing authorities over the fact that they weren't offered protections. And the problem again with rugby union, rugby league, they are sports which are high contact. They're very big players. You know, you get people who are 20 stone running at each other at full speed at international levels on a minutely basis. So this is something that will always be around and about. It will always be an issue.
And again, actually, you know, I had questions and concerns as a school governor whether or not children playing rugby union, whether actually it should be obligatory to wear scrum caps. You know, I know there's a sort of a macho thing about not wearing them, but I was concerned there wasn't enough evidence, data being collected, research being gone into to see that, as because, you know, it seems to me that is one way of protecting children. Have you any thoughts on that? And might we see even see the sight of essentially some form of scrum cap being worn in football if we want to keep heading in football?
Well, we are seeing some editions of that in certain places. For example, Raul Jimenez, who fractured his skull for Wolves last year. You know, awful injury in a match against Arsenal playing football. He now has to wear what is essentially a glorified scrum cap. Petr Cech, the Chelsea goalkeeper, used to have to do that for the same issue. I think it's something we'll see. I don't think we're going to see it become a mainstream thing personally. Certainly not in the near term. But the issue with the scrum cap playing rugby, the scrum cap is more something to protect your ears, something to protect your skull, rather than the brain inside, which is, it's all well and good saying, oh, well, my head's protected because, you know, I'm fully protected, fully covered, everything like that. But the problem is the brain moving around inside the skull. That's what's causing this kind of injury. Fascinating.
We've got more to talk about, positive news as opposed to some of the medical challenges. If you've got some experience of this, give us a call, 0344 499 1000. If you've got questions or experiences on the issue of dementia, of concussion in football or rugby. We'll be back after a short break. The time is 12:42 and you are listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. We're nearly approaching the top of the hour. Time has flown despite the grim, grey, gloomy weather outside. We're talking to Tom Clayton, TalkSport journalist, about the sporting issues of the day. Tom, what's going on with Harry Kane? Is he going to play this afternoon? Is he going to City? I mean, you know, there's big numbers. Tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, well, the situation with Harry Kane, everyone has a question, and that question is worth about £150 million. We don't really know what's happening with the future of Harry Kane. There's some people saying that, he without a question is going to move to Manchester City. There's some people without question saying he's going to stay at Tottenham and sign a new contract, possibly. I don't think, I'd be surprised if he signs a new contract, but I'd also be, at this stage, I'd be surprised if he doesn't move to Manchester City. Now, he is in the squad for Tottenham's match away at Wolves this afternoon. We'll find out in around about 15 minutes whether he's actually in the starting team, whether he's just going to be named on the bench, or whether he's going to be playing at all.
And what are the sort of the motivational issues about, if he wants to go to City, which by all accounts it seems that he does, how hard is it for him to give his all, playing for Tottenham, where you've got an owner and a manager who are desperate to keep him? It must be, he must be really torn.
I think it's not just the owner and the manager who are desperate to keep him. I think the fans would be quite happy to keep him as well. Arguably becoming one of the greatest players of all time in the Premier League, certainly. Why on earth would Tottenham want to get rid of him? I appreciate there are some fans out there who may be unhappy with his conduct, missing the start of training, missing the first couple of games through lack of match fitness. But I think there are issues there that Harry Kane will have to resolve if he were to stay. But for him, I think his motivation really lies in the fact I think he wants to move away. I think he's made that quite clear. Yes. And he wants to go not just for, a more sizable pay packet, which I'm sure he will be due, but I think he also wants to move away because he wants to move to a club where he can win trophies quite readily. Sure. We laugh and joke about Tottenham not winning any trophies, but the matter of the fact is they haven't won any trophies. Harry Kane in his career has never lifted a trophy.
Well, essentially,
which is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, they've got an owner essentially that wants to try and make money as opposed to be sure of winning trophies, and that, I guess, is the difficulty. So not long to wait to find out whether or not. What other quick in the last couple of minutes? What other sporting news do our listeners need to know about what's going on this afternoon? Liverpool obviously won yesterday. I'm delighted by that. They're top of the table. Where's this going?
Well, you never know. Top of the table at the start of the season can mean anything. It can be a statement of intent from former champions.
Or it could be the one and only.
It could be the one and only. You never know. But I think Liverpool are looking much better than they were this time last year. Virgil van Dijk's come back from a very serious knee injury, and I think Liverpool are looking better for it. As well, speaking of Manchester City, we mentioned them a moment ago. 5 goals against Norwich. Again, it's a game that we kind of expected Manchester City to win and win big as well. Yeah. Norwich are looking like a team who have come up from the Championship and not really learned any lessons from their last day in the Premier League.
So they could be heading straight down.
Possibly again. But I think another thing that we're going to be looking out for today is the debut, or the second Chelsea debut, of Romelu Lukaku. Of course, they're playing away at London rivals Arsenal. That's going to be a fascinating game. Arsenal, a couple of big signings this week. I don't think that either Martin Odegaard or Aaron Ramsdale are going to feature today, but I wouldn't be surprised to see an upset. I think Arsenal, at home with the fans behind them, capacity crowd at the Emirates, I think it could be an interesting game. And of course, Manchester United away at Southampton. Yeah. We won't mention how they did last week against Leeds.
There we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, look, Tom, thank you very much for that insight into the world of sport, what's going on, the difficulty with dementia, but also some of the latest news about Harry Kane and the big London derby. Tom Clayton of TalkSport, thank you very much indeed. Well, we have still a few minutes left. There's still time to give us a quick call, 0344 499 1000. I've had a little bit of grief for not giving out some of the tweets and the messages. There is a message tweet come in here to the show. Please let my 17-year-old, extremely bright son continue his education. this year. Likewise, my 15-year-old daughter, they can't afford to miss any more schooling. I think that absolutely agrees 101% with what Molly Kingsley of Us For Them was saying earlier. I think parents are feeling this all over the country. They don't want schooling disrupted anymore. Surely we must get the exams back to where they were a couple of years ago. There are some massive, massive issues. And what we don't want is the unions continuing to dominate the Department of Education's thinking, continuing to petrify the Secretary of State for Education, Gavin Williamson. He's got to step up to the plate. He's got to show some courage. He's got to lead from the front in saying, no, we're not going to have children's education disrupted anymore. And if the unions don't like it, frankly, that's tough. The Secretary of State needs to show who's the boss, who is in charge. Well, it's been a busy show. We've covered lots of issues. My Sunday Spotlight issues. Firstly, we looked at the implications of the Afghanistan crisis on how China might react, whether they extend their influence into Afghanistan. And of course, Afghanistan, huge mineral deposits, rare earth metals, including particularly lithium. We looked at the impact of whether or not Taiwan is at greater risk of being unified with China through some form of takeover or invasion, a serious potential implication of the Afghanistan crisis. And that's why these big strategic geopolitical issues are so important. But then the better news that we looked at, of course, was the question of treatments. The new treatment that's been approved here in the UK, the nattily named Ronapreve. But my question, why did it take so much longer than its approval in the US last November? It was, interestingly, one of the drugs that was given to, on an experimental basis, apparently was given to President Trump when he caught COVID last autumn. And I think the focus on treatments, there needs to be much more understanding on it. There needs to be much more pressure on governments to tell us what new drugs are coming up, what ones are in trials, the size of the trials, the speed of them. We need to know more, because it is part of the way out of the COVID crisis. It's part of the way out of the pandemic, of giving people confidence, reducing anxiety, reducing fear. And we had a great caller who sadly, he's unable to take the vaccine because of his medical condition. So for him, treatments is absolutely vital, absolutely critical. And, he said he didn't have enough information. He wanted to learn more, know more. And so I say, actually, if it's a new drug, the cost of it, yes, we need value for money. But actually, when you're talking about saving hundreds of lives by having a new, fast-approved drug that can be taken, that will reduce the impact of hospitalisation, reduce the severity of the illness, that is good news. And bringing that to be used and approved is much more important than the cost of it. And of course, the progress on repurposing existing drugs. We spoke to Professor Peter Hellings from Brussels, involved in looking at repurposing existing drugs, and the progress on that, which is so important, because we've got to get our lives back. We've got to push on again. I think, in a sense, so many people say they've just had enough and it's time to move forward. And it is also, unbelievably, it's time that the show has come to the top of the hour. Time has flown. I've enjoyed it hugely. I hope you have. We've looked at some critical issues, but I've enjoyed it so much. Our next presenter, the one and only, the incredible Bob Mills, he may have to drag me out of the seat, but he has just stepped into the studio. Bob, a very good afternoon to you.
Richard,
what's
you'd be
going
very
on?
welcome. You could stay for the next 3 hours, because I bet what you've got to say about Miles Jupp's new book, The Lion King at the Lyceum Theatre.
You could say it about 1 minute.
Lee John performing at the Jazz Cafe. We'd love to know your thoughts on this. And finishing with live music. Oh, look at that book. Cider Country.
Oh, that sounds good.
That does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
James Crowden, Cider Country. Well, I'll chat with him about this lovely show. A lot going on in there.
There is a lot going on. It's never ending. I mean, just
is it
so
just
much...
me? And I don't do politics, and forgive me if I sound foolish because I don't really know what's going on. But is it just me? But when I look on the big screens and see Tony Blair, I'm thinking, I'd keep my head down if I was you.
Yeah, I mean...
Is that not,
Well, look, he loves being in the spotlight. The rumours that he wants to come back into UK politics, who knows? And but he is.
But at this particular time, surely all the problems that are going on, was he? Well, not...
he was very involved. He took us into Afghanistan. He's written some very interesting words, and he's much maligned. But I think on this, he's right, like many of us, to criticise Joe Biden, who is responsible for this mess. My time is up. Before I go, I must just thank my amazing production team. They've done a brilliant job. Huge thanks to all of them. I'll be here, same time, same place next week. Up next is Bob Mills. But now you've been listening to Tice Talk. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. It is, of course, the home of common sense, the one, the only Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB.